defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you won't?
What happens when one of America's most powerful former health officials refuses to answer nearly every question under oath? In this explosive Senate exchange, Dr. Anthony Fauci repeatedly invokes the Fifth Amendment as Senator Bernie Moreno confronts him over pandemic restrictions, vaccine mandates, closed schools, lost businesses, and families who say their lives were permanently changed. But invoking the Fifth Amendment is not proof of guilt. So why did Fauci's silence create such a dramatic political firestorm? Was he simply following legal advice? Or did this hearing expose deeper questions that still have not been answered? Watch the full exchange closely, because the final moments turn intensely personal and could shape the next phase of the investigation.
I'll echo Senator Johnson's comments about your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. I think it was dead on. Very, very well done. Mr. Fauci, do you know who David Schertler is?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. What does the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution say?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
No, I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So you're invoking a right that you don't know who wrote it or what it says. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Wow. All right, let me tell you who David Schertler is for the audience, because he was ejected by the chairman. He's a high-profile criminal attorney. He's represented some really great people, like Senator Bob Menendez. Maybe that's somebody who my Democrat colleagues may remember took gold bars as bribes from the Egyptians. And there's an article here in the Washington Free Beacon that talks about why you would hire a guy like David Schertler. And the comment is, if you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic, you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyers, not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience. There was a mom in Ohio during the depth of the coronavirus pandemic, decided to go to her high school football game for her son. They hadn't been out much. The kids had been learning at school, and then the school got shut down. They hadn't really gotten much out of that education. As any parent knew, that remote learning was no learning at all. But it was a Friday night. Her son wanted to go watch a buddy go play football. So they went to the stadium. They sat alone, far from everybody else, just a mom, a dad, a few kids. They didn't feel they needed to wear masks because it was stupid, because they were outside. They all live together. They're not near anybody. Dr. Fauci, do you know what happened to that mom and that family? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
They were dragged out of that stadium and arrested. Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people, and that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. And if my Democrat colleagues are standing there defending you, I hope the voters of the United States of America watch the clips of every one of you doting on a guy who was more interested in being a celebrity than saving American people. I will make it my mission to make certain that every single one of those Democrats who did that will see that clip over and over and over again. Because there is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you won't apologize to the military members who Joe Biden summarily dismissed from the military for not taking the vaccine?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the business owners that lost their business, shattered their lives, and they'll never recover?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the moms who had to force their infant children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, to put masks on, and what that did and how that traumatized those kids?
Under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the family members of the people who died because they took your advice and not only got the first vaccine, but the 5, 6 other boosters that they did not need?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to that mom from Ohio for being arrested for watching a football game with her family?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you didn't know who wrote the Fifth Amendment. It's James Madison. Lived in this town. I can only wonder what he would think of somebody like you invoking his writings to shield culpability for the actions that you took. It's no secret why you have to hire the biggest dirtbag attorney on the planet, because of what you did. I hope you're paying him well. And I hope that one way or the other, somewhere, sometime, you answer for your crimes.
What you just watched was not a normal policy debate. It was a collision between public anger, constitutional rights, and 6 years of unresolved resentment over the COVID era. Senator Bernie Moreno ended his questioning by demanding accountability in the strongest possible terms, while Dr. Anthony Fauci answered with the same Fifth Amendment invocation he had used throughout the hearing. That final exchange may have been emotionally explosive, but it also leaves the country with a difficult question. Did this hearing move Americans closer to the truth, or did it deepen the political divide without producing new answers? The biggest takeaway is not simply that Fauci refused to answer. It is that the refusal became the entire story. When a former senior public health official invokes the Fifth Amendment again and again, even when asked about an apology, his attorney or the wording of the amendment, the public reaction is predictable. Many viewers will see avoidance. Others will see a witness following legal advice in a proceeding where lawmakers have openly discussed possible prosecution. Legally, invoking the Fifth Amendment is not an admission of guilt. It is a constitutional protection against being compelled to provide potentially self-incriminating testimony. Politically, however, repeated silence creates a vacuum. And that vacuum will inevitably be filled by suspicion, outrage, and competing narratives. Moreno's argument centered on the human cost of pandemic-era decisions: closed schools, lost businesses, dismissed service members, masking rules, and families who felt shamed or punished for questioning official guidance. Those consequences deserve serious examination. Millions of Americans experienced disruption, isolation, financial damage, interrupted education, and deep distrust. But the clip also compresses a complicated chain of responsibility into one target. Fauci advised federal officials and became the public face of the response, but governors, mayors, school boards, employers, military leaders, federal agencies, and 2 presidential administrations made and enforced different policies. Holding leaders accountable requires identifying who decided what, when they decided it, what evidence they had, and whether they corrected mistakes as scientific knowledge changed. That distinction matters because some of the senators' questions were framed as accusations rather than established findings. The claim that particular deaths were caused by following Fauci's vaccine advice, for example, was asserted during the questioning, but was not proven by evidence presented in this clip. The same is true of the broader suggestion that hiring a prominent defense attorney demonstrates culpability. People facing intense congressional and legal scrutiny often hire experienced counsel. That may look dramatic, but it does not establish criminal conduct. At the same time, Fauci's legal right to remain silent does not erase the public's legitimate demand for answers. Americans deserve a clear accounting of how guidance was developed, why recommendations changed, how uncertainty was communicated, whether dissenting scientific views were fairly considered, and whether officials overstated their confidence. They also deserve transparency about research funding, agency communications, records preservation, and any conflict between public statements and private discussions. Those questions should be pursued through documents, sworn testimony from other witnesses, independent analysis, and verifiable evidence, not merely through the emotional force of a viral exchange. One of the most striking moments was Moreno's request that Fauci look at audience members who believed they had been mistreated during the pandemic. Fauci did not comply. Supporters of Moreno will view that as cold or dismissive. Fauci's defenders may argue that he was following counsel's instruction not to engage with a carefully staged confrontation. The video cannot tell us what Fauci was thinking. What it does show is how far the hearing had moved away from technical questions and into a symbolic reckoning over dignity, suffering, and blame. Another contradiction hangs over the entire exchange. Lawmakers say they want factual answers, yet the format often rewards confrontation more than clarification. A senator controls the microphone, presents a narrative, and asks questions to a witness who is refusing to respond. That may create a powerful clip, but it does not test the senator's claims through meaningful back and forth. On the other hand, Fauci's blanket refusal means viewers never hear his explanation, correction, or defense. The result is a one-sided record that energizes both camps while persuading very few people in the middle. The wider political consequences could be significant. Republicans are likely to use the hearing to argue that pandemic leadership escaped accountability and that Congress must continue investigating. Democrats are likely to portray the proceeding as partisan retaliation against a career public servant. The committee chairman has indicated that contempt proceedings may be considered, while Fauci and his attorneys maintain that the investigation is politically motivated. Whatever happens next, the legal questions will be separate from the political theater. Any credible finding will require evidence that can survive scrutiny beyond a committee room confrontation. There is also a larger lesson here for public health. Trust cannot be restored by demanding that Americans forget what happened. It also cannot be restored by treating every disputed decision as proof of a criminal conspiracy. A serious national review would acknowledge uncertainty, identify mistakes, distinguish federal advice from local enforcement, examine harms and benefits, and explain how future emergencies will be handled differently. That process should be transparent enough to satisfy skeptics and disciplined enough to resist unsupported claims. So the final image from this hearing is not a confession, and it is not an exoneration. It is a former official invoking a constitutional right while an elected senator voices the anger of citizens who believe their suffering was ignored. The silence may be lawful, but it is politically costly. The accusations may be powerful, but they still require proof. What viewers should watch next is whether Congress produces documents, corroborating witnesses, and specific findings, or whether this moment becomes another viral confrontation that generates heat without delivering clarity. What do you think? Was Fauci's refusal a reasonable legal response to a hostile investigation, or are there still major questions that demand direct answers? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more political updates and analysis.